What's this U-turn of all the politicians are now backing Nigel Farage and his bank account being closed? What's all that about? Is that a big story or is it not? Or is it a non-story?
Non-story.
I'm not certain, but I don't think it's that big a story. I mean, other people have had their bank accounts frozen in the past. Obviously, he's a well-known character, so for them to strike someone who's a well-known character politically is some significance, but otherwise, I think they're exaggerating it. Yeah. But nevertheless, he shouldn't be struck. So we were just talking about YouTube, YouTube strikes, which of course is much more ubiquitous for ordinary people and much more influential on the shaping of opinion. And that, of course, has become a mechanism of censoring the world. Not only YouTube, but all the other channels that are doing it. Not only the channels that are doing it, but also public opinion formation in general has been turned into something. It's like you massage and nudge people to a certain way of behaving and thinking, which of course is in line with what we saw throughout the whole of the pandemic. Shape people's views, make them behave in a certain way, nudge them to act in a particular way, form social opinion, decide what's acceptable and unacceptable. And in my opinion, it should be a general rule that people are allowed to say what they like. I think that's the general rule. I'm with Elon Musk on that.
Democracy.
And funny thing is, most of the left, and that's the peculiarity in recent times, is that most of the left have sided, in my opinion, with the wrong side. And they've taken a view that censorship is some sort of moral credential. And the consequence of that is you get the sort of madness that we've seen in the last few weeks, whereby our sensory perception tells us that the weather is shit, but the news tells you it's boiling. This is what is?
Where? Oh, you mean? Hang on. You mean not in this little spot
I
on
said
Earth now?
our sensory perception tells us something different from the stories we are told.
No, we have to.
Now you can turn around. After all, as you know me from Speaker's Corner, and whenever the revolution wasn't going the way I thought in Britain, in fact there was no revolution, I would always talk about another country, right? And now you're doing the same thing. Whenever the climate isn't collapsing around us, point to another place where it is. So for example, you jump from one.
We're the only people that matter, are we? Us. We.
Exactly. You see, here we go. So I said, you have now become the younger version of me who was more ignorant than I am today.
Hardly younger.
Or you've become more intelligent by adopting my earlier self, and I am now expressing your previous cynicism.
That's the earlier
One
self.
or the other.
That's the earlier,
But in either way,
earlier yourself I want to hear. That's what I want to hear.
I just heard you say something.
No,
I thought I heard you say something, which I think is about right. I thought I heard you say Wally, and then it occurred to me, where's Wally? Where's Wally? It's like it's a picture of thousands of people, and amongst all those heads, you have to look for one head, right? And it's a children's, like
Wally.
children's.
Where's Wally?
Where's Wally? So, where's climate change? Oh, Hawaii. Hawaii's burning. 100 dead. Italy's burning.
Yes.
People are too hot. Spain.
Italy,
Spain's burning.
Yep.
Spain's too hot. Turkey. How hot is it? How hot is it in Turkey? Come on, someone go on the internet now and tell. Come on, Sam. Look at Turkey, Anatolia, and Anatolian Istanbul. Temperature today. Look it up. What's your guess? 45.
I don't know.
50.
Who knows? I don't know.
Who knows?
Too hot. Well, it's above.
How do you know what is too hot?
It's above the average temperature.
Above what?
Above the average taken over thousands of years.
Over thousands of years.
Ice cause change. There's no doubt that our climate is warming.
27 degrees. 26, 27. Any advance on 27?
In the past week.
And therefore it proves that I'm wrong, right?
No. Because
there's
you
no global
said,
warming.
when I said a minute ago countries that were supposedly boiling, you mentioned Turkey. When we looked up Turkey, the facts disagreed. Therefore, why not start out? This is the method used. Start out by looking at the hottest temperature on Earth, and then from that, present that news to you, and say the world, as Gutierrez, United Nations, United Nations official said, the world is boiling.
Well, I wouldn't go as far.
Global boiling.
That's language for you. But
Boiling point is not 27 degrees Celsius in Turkey.
One little spot. But would you
One little spot now.
Would
Turkey's a big place.
Would you agree the world is warming?
No, I don't agree. I don't.
Now,
The Earth,
now,
would you agree?
now,
all the science.
here we get on to the science. Hang on.
Science is very important.
Here we get on to the science.
Yes.
The gentleman here tells us the science says that it is boiling. Now, when you see news stories that say scientists say, the science says, a study by scientists says, and you look at the news story for the last 2.5 months, they have all referred to one scientific source.
Oh, no,
And that source is called Climate Reanalyzer. Look it up. That's the source they're referring to. What source are you referring to? What source are you referring
I'm
to?
referring to scientists across the world. But
Which
let me ask you,
source?
Am I right in saying 2 years ago you had a speaker here at your request talking about global cooling? Remember 2 years ago? You came for oh, you do.
Who?
2 or 3. I don't know who you were across there. 2 or 3.
Peers, maybe, I don't know.
No, not peers. Peers. No one listens to peers, for God's sake.
Well, you do.
Well, I listen to and I do listen to.
There you go, what are you talking about? You're not no one. You're somebody. Have faith in yourself, my friend. Believe in yourself.
I do believe
You
in
can
myself.
become what you want.
I also believe,
Reach for the stars, my
I'm
friend.
also a scientist as well. and I
Well, there
do
you
believe
go.
in science.
Oh, scientist. Well, there you go. Tell us about global warming then, if you're a scientist.
But I do believe in one.
What is a scientist?
Having said that, you have it your
Let's
own way.
ask the question. I'm not having it my own way, I'm debating with you. We're trying to get some common identification of problem in order to assess it, evaluate it, and form an opinion.
That's what a
Or at
scientist
least,
does.
well,
Does just that.
scientist also has to
That's
talk
what
to
a
the public.
scientist does. No, science isn't. It's a science. It's
But
not
we don't have to
opinion.
talk to the public.
No, certainly not. It's a science. It's
Now-
the investigation. It's the science. It's
So
in.
what is the meaning of a scientist?
Well,
you are-
I'm an investigator, if you like.
Are you
as
a scientist?
As it happens, I'm a mathematician. As it happens, but I call
So are you a
myself
scientist?
I believe in science and I speak
Now, I
science.
didn't-
and
what do you mean
understand
you
science
believe
and
in
I'm
science?
brought up in science.
Firstly, if you believe
and I
in
don't know what to talk
science,
about me for, but I don't want to talk about
I want to discuss the idea. Yeah, we use the phrase a lot. Science.
Yes.
So what does it mean?
It means it's, first of all, it's something pure science. It's something we look at and we investigate a particular phenomenon. If you
Okay,
like.
so
it could be global
People who
warming.
investigate
It could be
phenomena,
something to do with the universe.
right?
Yes.
Which could be many different types of phenomena.
Well,
How do they investigate
well, a
phenomena?
social scientist.
How
might-
does a scientist-
social scientist might look at human beings.
Okay, but let's abstract from social, mathematician, physics, economics. If economics
Well,
is a science,
well, I was-
let's say
well,
chemistry,
to give you-
biology,
to give you-
virology,
well, to give you-
medicine. How do we identify, as an abstraction from the specific fields, how do we generalize what the totality of the meaning of science is?
by looking at the total.
What is the universal components that you can call science,
The majority of
as
science-
opposed to a type of science?
the majority of science? For example, take that person at the top of the speaker's wall there. I was talking about evolution.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't believe in evolution. Well, science is the study, for example, of evolution. Is it a fact or is it not a fact? I believe that there's
Well, you're not really getting anywhere. Come on.
Incredible science that shows that evolution is a
Does someone-
fact.
does someone
It's a
else-
fact. Now,
You're
now,
not abstracting
now you
what
and
science
I,
is.
I told you.
Whether evolution is a fact or not is a question for investigation
it's the test,
by science.
It's the testing,
It is not
it's the
science.
investigation.
So the fact
Well, that's
someone
what the
says
scientists do.
evolution is true doesn't make it science.
Well,
And it depends on what you mean by evolution. Some theories of evolution are wrong. Other theories of evolution are right.
That's why it's
right?
theory, yeah.
Adam and Eve is a theory of evolution, right? It might be an incorrect biblical theory of evolution,
not.
but it's, of course it's a theory of evolution.
not a
It's a theory there were two people put here by God, and we all come from them.
the
haven't
evolution,
evolved.
That's an
the evolution is one.
That's a lineage, that's not an evolution.
The
Of course it's an
evolution is one.
evolution.
They would only be an evolution if they change what they are. They
Oh,
haven't.
you're talking about a specific type of concept of evolution.
No, there is only
In other
one
words, you
specific
mean
concept of
Darwinian
evolution.
descent of man, and you mean Darwinian
all
struggle
right,
for
all right,
survival
all right.
between species as driving forces
all right.
of evolution.
I should be more-
You don't mean the word evolution
I should-
itself.
all right, let me-
Evolution as a
let me-
term
let me say-
existed before
let me-
Darwin.
Let's
right?
use the word then.
So what do we mean by science?
Well, for
Science
me,
is the
for
study
me,
of truth.
Study of
Between
truth.
reality and human thoughts.
And how do we verify science? What are the methods?
That's
It
a
is
big
the-
question. That's a
God,
big question.
it is the
It's a question.
exact. That's what we're trying to deal with here.
Repeatable
This is Speaker's Corner.
experimentability.
God, existence, meaning. That's what we're doing. So, what is? Firstly, the study of truth. Right. So, in other words, we don't know what truth is. Right?
no,
We're trying to identify
trying to get there.
the means of discovering what truth is.
Yeah.
Science is a tool, as you say, for of trying to reach towards the truth. Correct. We'll agree on that. Yes, yes,
I agree
yes,
with that.
yes. Can we agree on
Yes,
that?
we agree with that.
Right,
The thing is,
right.
we're moving in the right direction.
Hang on.
We are
Let's
finding out
go
more and
from
more.
one form of agreement, which we can understand something from, a basis, and then build on that basis and find where our
Which is what's
disagreement
happening.
lies. Right? Rather than claim by chest pumping and saying, I know the science and you are wrong.
No.
Rather than saying that, and you are ignorant because you don't accept it.
Well, no.
Rather than doing that, I'm trying to go back to basics, which isn't often discussed. We've had quite a lot of people claiming they know the science,
Sorry, but
the science,
is this-
over the last few years.
Is this with the-
Quite a lot of people
Is this with the last-
claiming authority
this
on
with
the
the-
basis of science.
Is this with the louder voice wins the argument? Is that the case we are now?
I'm trying to gather
No,
a,
no, you're
in
not.
case
You're
you
not,
didn't
no.
know.
No,
I think you do know this is Speaker's Corner.
Yes, of
We
course.
have just agreed
And
that
of course-
science
of course the debate-
is the
the debate-
pursuit of truth using certain tools, perhaps. Yeah? So what are those tools? What are the tools of scientific verification? Sorry?
Repeatable, controllable experiment.
Very good. Repeatable and controllable experiments. So you have a method to check and verify and recheck whether something comes out correct or not.
Like
Right?
global
Right?
warming, for example.
We have, it
Like
might
global
be,
warming, for
it might be, but as that's the contested issue, we can perhaps go back to investigate whether these methods that the gentleman is saying are valid or not in the circumstances of global warming, or perhaps of COVID, or perhaps of other issues that they're claimed to
COVID.
be scientific fact. Right?
Back to COVID, you're a COVID
I said
denier.
perhaps we
I
can.
remember
See,
that
here we go
very well.
again.
You know
Here we
very
go
well.
again.
No,
We
you-
get the irritated. I am Mr. Irritated, who then turns around and says, "Oh, blah, 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 blah. COVID denier, climate denier." All I'm trying, we haven't got on to either of
No,
those
you-
questions
no, you
yet.
don't- you don't want
All
to.
we've gone on to is what is method, which we can call science.
Depends on the science.
So, a pursuit of truth using experimentation, which seeks to repeat the results of the experiment under controlled conditions. So that's one
what's been done with-
methodology.
which is what's been
What
done with
else
global
does it
warming.
do? How do you
What's been
know
done
if
with
it's
global
not
warming.
science?
Which is what's been done with global warming.
Huh?
How do you know it's not science?
How do you know if a scientific conclusion is false? How do you know?
Speak to a fact checker. Speak to
Huh?
a fact checker.
The hypothesis, you prove the hypothesis not true.
And
So
testing
you
and
could
testing
have
again.
1,000 controlled experiments on one subject matter, conclude always that it's true, and it's an attempt to approximate to the truth, no doubt about it,
Pretty good
and then
approximation.
discover that there was a flaw in the fundamental design of the test. and that the result is actually just a self-fulfilling hypothesis, and that something is wrong with the design. And the way philosophically over the last century we've deemed this to be verifiable science is to use what a philosopher Karl Popper called refutation. Refutation. Scientific idea should have within itself the ability to understand what might refute it, what might prove it wrong, right? What might prove it wrong.
The null hypothesis, that's what you do. It's
Sorry?
what you do. The null hypothesis is what you do. You try to destroy it. You try to dismantle it.
Try to take the argument apart.
You try to take
You try to say,
say
what would prove this wrong? What would prove this wrong?
If you're long, and that can happen.
And you would be able, as the scientist making the attempt to verify the truth or to get to the truth, you would be the person responsible for outlining how you might refute this argument. Right? How you might refute the argument you are putting forward as scientific truth. And you should, as a scientist, you should welcome, encourage, support all attempts, if you like, even hang on a minute. We're not getting anywhere if they're constantly sniping in my ear.
Have you got an alternative hypothesis to global warming?
Yeah, look, we haven't got on to what the subject matter is. First, we're discussing the methodology that is defined as science. Then once we've defined these questions, then we can investigate specific fields of science.
There's a scientific method. It's not methodology in that sense. The scientific method to try to prove.
Oh, don't be so miserable.
I'm not being miserable. I'm saying
You are. Is he being miserable? Is there a scientific evidence that this man is being miserable? They're repeated controlled experiments. I tried to refute it. Now there's a smile. It's refuted.
I came across here.
It's refuted. It's refuted. So he's smiling. He's no longer miserable.
I'm being a miserable
I was
sod.
scientifically incorrect in my designation.
But then I was born to be a miserable sod.
There we go. So I was right after
Which is
all.
why I come here and you cheer me up every year and year and year.
Thank you. Thank you. Now please.
Always do.
So scientific
Talk
method
politics.
involves attempting to approximate the truth, using controlled experiments which are verifiable and repeatable, and also able to be refuted by evidence. Right? So, what about when people tell you that you must listen to those people who are the scientists, and they are correct and you are ignorant, and you don't understand things, because you are looking at a chart, and the chart always looks like this. It's always going upwards. And they're saying, something is happening now that is about to destroy mankind. Perhaps some illness is spreading through the world that will kill everyone. Perhaps, like COVID, for example. There you go. Like COVID. Perhaps there is something in the air. Something to do with cars or cows' farts that is making the temperature go like this. And everyone must listen to those people who show you the chart going like this. Everyone must listen to them because they are very clever, and they come on television and they're in the newspaper and they're quoted again and again and again. And as I said to you, if you look at the last 3 months, all the people in the news, BBC, Financial Times, Economist, Independent, Guardian newspaper, Times newspaper, those reports in the last 3 months that have gone like this and said the temperature's going up and we're global boiling and the world's temperature is the hottest it's been for 120,000 years are using one source.
No, they're
And
not
that
using
source
one source.
is called climate reanalysis. You haven't
there's-
looked. You haven't looked.
I have looked.
They all refer to
Universities
one
across
source,
the world have looked
and that
at this.
source is
And the
called
consensus is-
climate reanalyzer. I said, in the last 3 months, there has been a campaign to tell the world that the world is boiling, heating up, unbearably, hotter than ever before. There's a campaign to say this. And the source for this is Climate Reanalyzer.
3 months.
Now, Climate Reanalyzer, if you look at their webpage where they hold their data, you will see the source for saying everything is going like this is a climate model. It is not a fact. It is not evidence-based. It is a model. Now, computer models. Anybody run a business here? Run a business? Anybody know how to use the spreadsheet program Excel? If you use Excel and you start putting in, making a business plan, once you've got a business plan, magic happens when you start making business plans. When you start making business plans, you make a plan for break even for a year, for £1 million operation, from selling ice creams at Speaker's Corner. A normal person might think, oh my God, I can't do that. But a businessman, they get an accountant and an expert, and they make a plan. Borrowing £10,000, making £1 million. Unlikely to succeed, but you can certainly make a chart that shows this happens, right?
It's almost
And
like
once you
business is different from
Sorry?
science, though, isn't it?
What's that?
It's almost like a business plan isn't a science model, is it?
It's almost like, that's a very interesting point. It's almost like a business plan is not like science. Correct. So what I'm going to say, extrapolating from that is, it's almost like a model is not science.
No.
A model
No.
is a series of inputs based on a series of assumptions. If those assumptions are founded on the scientific consensus on climate, which is global warming is driven by man and temperatures are increasing since 1850, regardless of the empirical data, then you automatically start out with an input that starts out with an assumption that climate models are correct and the temperatures are going like this. And then all you need is to get a little child of 15 years of age with Asperger's syndrome, put them in front of the Swedish Parliament for a month, broadcast their face across the world, call them the face of the lost generation whose entire planet is facing destruction because old people don't care, run a huge global campaign, get that girl to meet with the great and famous of the world, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Antonio Guterres, Madonna, Barbie, and the gentleman here. And all of a sudden, you have, not only do you have this, but you have millions of people around the world whose hearts cry out, how can we destroy the planet when this young child is suffering and representing the suffering of humanity? If you don't take notice of what's happening to the climate, you won't notice such disasters as nearly happened there. That nearly fell over and knocked that man over. That man may have fallen down and cracked his head on the floor. Someone may have turned round and watched him and also fallen on top of him and cracked his head on the floor. Someone else might have gone home, shocked by that, fallen over and crashed his head on the floor. 3 people might have died as a consequence of the wind blowing over Speaker's Corner. And I can make a model, a scientific model, based on that assumption that the wind in Speaker's Corner is higher today than it was for the last 30 years, and that is evidence as to why that bicycle fell over, that man nearly died, and 3 others nearly died as well. That is exactly the methodology. That is exactly the methodology that is being passed off as science today. And by the way,
so you don't think it's science?
the world's leading scientific expert today is a man by the name of John Ioannidis from Stanford University. And the most influential document he ever published, in fact, it is the most influential scientific paper for 30 years. It is called Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. Most public research findings are false. That paper, you can get it on the internet for free. Look it up. It's very readable, as most serious science should be. And you will discover, as you once said to me, shit in, shit out. Nonsense in, nonsense comes out. And that is the way in which science, by the way, look, I've got a PhD, I've done academic stuff, I know how the game works. When you do a PhD, the criteria for passing a PhD is that you provide some new and unique contribution to world knowledge. That's the criteria of a PhD. Then I went to a class at King's College about how to pass your PhD for the first year PhD students. And there was a professor came there and he taught the class. He said, look, a PhD is a unique contribution to human knowledge. It's a very difficult thing to pass. And it's a very difficult thing to invent something completely new. So, the way around this, he said, is you have a formula. Make the thing so small, such a tiny scope of study, that of course no one studied it before. Heiko Ku's speeches in Hyde Park from May until August 2023. No one has studied that. Therefore, if someone studies the videos of my speeches at Speaker's Corner and writes a PhD about it, it certainly will be a unique contribution to human knowledge. It won't be useful, unique contribution, but it will be unique. You could also say
It could be an important contribution.
what is the effect of climate change
What was your PhD in?
on grass.
What was your
and
PhD
I'll
in?
come on to that in 1 second. On grass at Speaker's Corner between May and August 2023.
Well, let's not be silly.
You could start out with, you could examine the biological composition,
It's been done.
the chemical of the grass in Speaker's Corner between May and August
haven't done that.
2023.
No, I haven't done that one,
It's
no.
never been done before. All you would do is come here every day and collect the specimens, examine them under microscopes, and then correlate them with the existing official data on climate change. And then you would have a story that you could write, a PhD, that would be able to write itself almost if you ask the right questions and sub-questions. This teacher was teaching us. Well, what you do is you start out with 3 questions. Main question, what is the composition of grass at Speaker's Corner? Second question, major question, what is the impact of climate change during May to August 2023? Third question, how do the two relate to each other? What is the evidence of the relationship between the two? Now, in order to do that, you do not have to prove that climate change is happening. You merely need to use the existing claims that climate change is happening. And all you're really doing is looking at blades of grass for 3 months. That's all you do.
So might it be
And then
possible-
you get a PhD. That's how the game works. And then people turn around and say, my God, as I did during the pandemic. And the only reason I did it was not because I wanted to beef myself up, was because the mainstream media were constantly saying, Dr. So-and-so says, the scientists say, the experts say. And so everyone was sort of, they used to turn around and say, oh, are you a doctor? How can you say that? What's your knowledge about this? Are you a doctor? What's your medical qualification? Do you think doctors in Britain, in the last 3 years, when they're working in hospitals, they go home after work and do research? They go home after work and have a drink. They go home after work and enjoy themselves.
So what?
They go home after work and take drugs.
So what?
They go home after work and watch Netflix. They do not have any special knowledge
They do.
over and above you
course they do.
about the dynamics of a so-called epidemic. They have no more knowledge than you or I do. And I was told this by doctors who I know myself, working on COVID wards. I remember a friend of mine, she works at Bristol University. She's a great neurosurgeon. And she worked on COVID wards in November 2020. She told me in private, she would inform me because she knew I didn't agree with what was going on. And she didn't have anyone to talk to at work about it because it was taboo. So she told me one day in November 2020, one person, on Saturday this was, one person has got the virus, so they tested positive. By Wednesday she wrote to me and said, There are 500 beds in the hospital then, cut in half to keep room for social bed distancing. Then she said to me, 250 have got it in the hospital since Saturday. I said, how did they get it? Was it passed within the hospital? She said, yes. Everybody caught it inside the hospital.
That's right.
Inside the hospital.
That's right, I agree
So,
with
half of the hospital had caught COVID, supposedly, in a few days, inside the hospital.
Of course. It's
Now,
logical.
if anybody then died, so if
Yes,
half of the
and in
hospital
nursing homes as well.
has caught COVID inside the hospital,
But people died, didn't they?
if they went in with cancer and then they died with COVID, they were called a COVID death. Even though they caught it inside the hospital. You remember a guy, famous Englishman, the hero, well, there were two heroes, weren't there? The first hero of the day in England was Captain Tom. Remember him?
Yes.
Ground control to Captain Tom.
Yeah, swimming pool and all. these days.
Captain Tom walked 100 times back and forth, right? Now, you might remember that sadly, as they say, as Matt Hancock used to say, sadly, Captain Tom died.
Oh, you're 100, wasn't it?
And he died at 100 years of age. But when he died, there were some stories, but then they were suppressed. Go back and look. Captain Tom went to hospital with an illness, not COVID. He died having caught COVID in hospital.
So,
In hospital.
So I didn't know. Is that true?
You
Is
didn't
that
know,
right?
Joe, and check it up, my
Well,
friend.
okay,
Check
so-
it up, my
so
friend.
hang on a second. So,
So
COVID,
our
so
hero,
COVID, so COVID does kill them.
my friend,
You just said COVID kills.
Yes, he did die.
I
he did
am
die
not
in
arguing about that
hospital.
at the moment.
Well, you did. You had that
I'm not
before.
arguing
No,
about
you
that at the
said it a
moment.
number of
I'm
times
saying
over the years.
he was defined
So
officially
he divided
as a COVID death.
Well, that's COVID
But the
death.
newspapers then didn't want to say it was a COVID death. But every day they kept saying, look at the numbers, look at the dead. Within 28 days of a positive test. Now I've done the number crunching on China. I looked at what happened in China. I'm writing a piece, I've been writing it for ages and ages and ages. Because I think knowing what happened there will tell us a great deal about what happened to the world. And what I found was right throughout the pandemic in China, the numbers of people who were supposedly positive with COVID and died from COVID instead of with COVID. Well, in actual fact, in China, the data showed that between 50 and 90% of people who were positive with PCR test, SARS positive, for example, in Shanghai, remember 2020, the images of Shanghai, everyone in their homes, people jumping out windows. 98% of positive tests were asymptomatic. Now, what sort of illness has a 98% asymptomatic rate? What kind of illness is that?
Can I
98%.
ask a question, Mr. Speaker?
It is
Mr.
not an
Speaker.
illness.
Mr.
It is
Speaker.
not an illness.
With respect,
Asymptomatic means nothing wrong with you. So if asymptomatic is 90, as in Shanghai,
no,
or 80%, 1st of April 2020, in Wuhan, 80% of tests asymptomatic. At the end of November, 2022, just when China ended the lockdowns, 85% asymptomatic. What does it tell you? Well, either, as some people argue, that the SARS virus, or that even if it is something we've already familiar with.
we are now.
The human body is already immune.
We are now.
What does the
We are
human
now.
body
We are
immunity
more
mean?
No, we are more now.
Are we only now?
So,
What is the shape of a
what a
coronavirus?
disrespect What
What is
disrespect-
the
No,
shape
listen, he's
of a
not
Let me
coronavirus?
ask you, so let me ask you.
Must be able
What
to
is the
answer.
shape
This man is
so
going
what
to
coronavirus?
answer
As you
for
know,
10 minutes.
I spent a lot of time in India. My wife's university in England, but she comes from India. Okay, so how do you account for the fact that there was pyre after pyre after pyre just after the pandemic? I'm talking about loads of people were being banned because they died. What did they die from? From COVID. There's no question about they died from COVID.
Well, there is a question.
No, there's not. No, there was
Very interesting
many,
point.
many excess deaths.
Firstly, last week,
It's the science.
the WHO published
Exactly.
the data on excess deaths.
America, all these
You know what they found? Throughout the period from 2020 until now, excess deaths that they defined on the criteria generally of 28 days of a positive test were around 6 million people. That's what they're claiming. So COVID deaths attributed on the basis of 28 days positive test about 6 million. That's the claim. 6 to 7 million.
No, do you know that
Excess death 15.9 million. 15.9 million. So more people, excess deaths without COVID than with COVID. So you ask yourself, and I went back to the data from the beginning in Europe, when it was claimed there was a huge number of people dying in Britain, a huge number of people dying in Europe. You look at the data. When the numbers went, there were excess deaths, compared with 5 years, by the way, not 50 years, 5 years. Yeah, would you mind? Would you mind?
I'm so sorry. Sorry about
Excess
I'm sorry
COVID,
about
the
that.
excess
I am sorry.
COVID was about this level, and the excess deaths about this level, nearly double. So what were those people dying of? So then you get the question, and all of you know this, because we've all seen horror films. We all know the phrase from when we're children. When we're children, there's a standard phrase in every language in the world, and it was, I was scared to death. Scared to death. I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that is what happened. The human immune system across the world was scared to death. Scared to death. People died of fear. Of fear. How do they die of fear? What is the mechanism of death from fear? Here is a man who knows the opposite. A man who's been shot in the head and who knows how to overcome that fear. This man is not afraid of anything, right? You're not afraid of people laughing at you. You're not afraid of standing up to people. You're not afraid of people looking at you. He's not afraid of death, are you? No. So, you're scared to death when you're 85 and you're in a care home in Britain in March 2020 and you're told you will not be able to see your children. You will not be able to see your grandchildren. No one can visit. You must put a mask on. The people looking after you must have a mask on. And you must sit in the care home on your own in your room in a period of palliative care. That is going to scare you to death. Inside the care homes, I spoke to someone who was working in the care homes. She told me it's like Dante's Inferno. It's one thing when you go to visit, it's another thing when you're inside there. The staff are low paid. They move from one care home to another. When people are really ill and they don't have family members spending time looking after them, they get put in an isolated room. All provisions, food and water is taken away from them and they are given midazolam or morphine and allowed to die. That is what actually happens inside the care homes to your mother, your father, your grandfather, your grandmother. That's what actually happened in 2020 in Britain in the care homes. They were used as de facto killing factories. That's what actually happened. Whether it was intentional or not, that's what happened. Yes, it was a crime. It was a crime. Whether intentionally good or not is irrelevant. That's actually what happened. And of course, that is where a lot of these deaths came from. Because you see, a people with hope. And by the way, if you didn't take any notice, for example, in Africa,
In Africa, there were lockdowns for a few weeks. Sometimes the army came out, tried to use it to get a bit of power. And after that, people would have this mask, like the gentleman there, hang around their ears, you know, because it protects you from COVID getting on your beard. Right? There you go, now he knows. There you go, look, I stink. So now he's fully protected because he's got my spittle on the inside of his mask, and now he's put it on the inside of his face to breathe in for half an hour. And so these delusions circulated, and they said, well, that's the science. You put a mask on your face and you're fully protected. You're protected. You've got a mask. In China, you know, in May 2020, everyone suddenly started wearing a mask. The government didn't say wear a mask outdoors, but you know, people they don't trust the government. So they thought maybe I should wear a mask outdoors. And some of you will have done that. You'll have walked around during the day, all day, put a mask on, go outside your house, walk down the street, past the other people with a mask on. I'm showing my solidarity, you know. I care. 2 meters distance, there's a marker on the floor. Go on, move on. You're trying to kill me. 2 meters, it says so. Stand on that spot there. And then you move forward 2 steps. And then you move forward 2 steps. You had queues outside supermarkets going. And then you had, in the local shop, a piece of perspex between the counter in Sainsbury's. They put some perspex here, so you don't pass it to the next person. You don't catch COVID off the person sitting next to you in the queue. And everyone was in solidarity with each other. And we clapped for the care homes, and we clapped for the nurses on a Thursday night. And there were posters all around London. Community is care. Love one another. United we stand. We will meet again. The Queen even said so. The Queen, mother of the world, grandmother of the world. She even said it. And someone said to me, India a minute ago, funeral pyres. Remember the pictures? The Delta variant in India, in Delhi. You know, just when everyone was about to go to the dance club and take drugs and dance all night, suddenly they were told, no, you can't do that. You need to go and get a vaccination. And even then, you need to put a mask on. And even then, you need to distance. And you certainly need to put that funny, smelly stuff on your hand and rub it around for 20 seconds so everyone feels like vomiting. And then, why do we need to do that? Because on television, just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water, out came Jaws again. A picture of funeral pyres, bodies in India being burnt on wooden funeral pyres. What they didn't tell you, that little bit of information they didn't tell you, is that bodies are always burnt in India on funeral pyres. They always have been burnt in India on funeral pyres. Not only that, but in the Ganges, they'll start the body on fire on a little boat, on a little raft. They'll put the body on it, set it on fire, and then push it into the river. If you go to the Ganges, the holy Ganges, where you go and wash yourself for holy reasons, it's full of dead bodies. You get body parts floating past you in the Ganges. But they didn't tell you that. They made you think, oh my God, India's having a massive pandemic and everybody's dying. Put your mask on, stand at 2 meters distance, wash your hand, and you'll be safe again when you've taken your jab, your second jab, your third jab. Now they're telling you to go for a booster. We've got the something variant come along. And therefore you need to take another booster if you're over 65 or immunocompromised. Not for the children under 12 anymore, funnily enough. Not for them anymore. I wonder why. Not for the under 65s anymore. Why not? Surely it's really good for you. It boosts your immunity. Surely it's really great. Why aren't they offering? We demand more vaccinations for everybody. We haven't had enough. That's why people are getting COVID again. That's what they're trying to tell. Why aren't they telling us that anymore? Why isn't the government coming out and saying, take your latest vaccination? Who had a COVID test last week? Who? How many of you? Come on, hands up. Who had a test? Why not? It's prevalent. 700,000 cases in Britain last week. Why aren't you taking it? Why aren't you taking the test anymore? What are you, COVID deniers? Are you Piers Corbyn's fan club? What's the matter with you? So suddenly, the story that went like this is the story that goes like this. Even the vaccination. Take that. No, don't take that. Wonder why not? Wonder why they're not saying take that anymore. Strange. Very strange story about it. But I'm not allowed to comment on that because you're not allowed to make comments on those things. Because you're not a scientist or a vaccinationologist. You haven't made vaccinations. You don't understand about the complicated issues of mRNA. Because mRNA is the science. It's going like that. The share price is going like that. The sales were going like that. Not anymore, but who knows what will happen in future. Last week, I think we've been saved now. We've been saved by them. We've got the video, in case you think it's obvious what I'm doing. Thank you. I know you'll maliciously use that in an evil way. You'll say I'm anti-Semitic or something like that. Hey, what about him?
Now, I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
Going back to climate change.
Oh, that old nut.
So 20 years ago, when I was growing up, I remember there's big articles about the ozone layer.
Yeah.
And then the whole world came together, banned a lot of
That's
stuff
what they
coming
said,
out,
yes.
fridges.
Yes, you'll remember that. I remember that as well. You know why this story was important? Because the story about global warming was based upon the idea that temperature's always going up from 1850 until now, right? The problem is, see, I'm catching you out, mate, catching you out faster than you. Missed it. 1850. The problem is this. Before 1945, although there was industrialization, it was limited to a few countries. So the level of emissions of CO2 were not significant enough, even in their theoretical model, to affect the climate. But temperatures were going up. But then after 1945, and by the way, in 1939 to 1945, I seem to remember from the history books that there was a major event happened then, which was dropping all sorts of peculiar things into the atmosphere. I don't know whether that had any impact on anything. Munitions, bombs, nuclear weapons, I don't know whether they had any impact on it. But God knows, torpedoes, you know, massive explosion of weaponry. But of course that has no impact on climate at all. It's only CO2 and methane that does, apparently. So then they said, climate change is like this. But they discovered that between 1945 and 1975, a period when there really was an increase in America and Europe, in Japan, in the Soviet Union, in China even, an increase in emissions of CO2, of methane. During that, and even in South America, significant increase. Industrialization began to spread across huge swathes of the world. What happened to the temperature? CO2 went up, temperature went down. 1945 to 1975. How come? CO2 going up, temperature going down. 1945, 1975. The first time when major CO2 emissions could, in theory, according to their theory, have caused a rise in temperature. It did not. So what did they do? A new story had to explain things. So what was that story? The story you mentioned. The ozone layer. There's a hole in the ozone layer. you're all going to die, and you need to put sun cream on all the time. Sun cream, sun cream, sun cream. Factor 7, factor 10, factor 50, factor 100, because you're all going to get skin cancer. That's what they said, remember? Skin cancer. Now, they didn't tell you that the overwhelming majority of research that tells you that you will get skin cancer from sitting in the sun unless you put on UV protective sun cream is funded by the sun cream industry. They didn't tell you that. The science of sun cream is run by the industry of sun cream. There is no benefit to putting sun cream on your face or your body. None. In fact, putting sun cream on you exposes you to increased risks of cancer from the sun. Why does it do that? Because it makes you think that you can lie in the sun for longer, whereas the radiation that comes from the sun that causes cancer passes through those sun creams and can cause cancer. So those people bunning in the sun for hours on end trying to get a suntan, well, they're asking for it. And those people who naturally respond to their experience from childhood, but when they go in the sun too long, they start to burn, and the lessons learnt, finger in the fire once, lesson learnt. You don't sit in the sun for hours on end. It's not safe. You require the sunshine for vitamin D, but you don't sit in the hot. They used to say in Malaysia, where my father's from, and in India, they used to say, mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. It's idiocy to sit in the boiling sun, cover yourself in cream, thinking you're getting an even suntan all over your body. It's idiocy. And yet, an industry has convinced the world that's the thing to do. And because of that, now, I put it to you, the same industrial interests have manipulated science on vaccines. Another one I'll tell you about, when you get to 50, as I did once, you go to the doctor, and I used to believe doctors. You go to the doctor, they're in an office, they're called doctor, must be special. They look up, they've got a computer, at that time most people didn't, and they turn around and say, oh, you're 50. Has any of your family died of a heart attack? Have any of your family got heart problems? Do you drink? Could we take a test for your cholesterol level? Cholesterol, eh? I don't know what cholesterol is. Surely it must be serious. A week later, I get my test results in, Mr. Koo. Please come and discuss with the doctor. You go to the doctor. The doctor says, your cholesterol levels are quite high. 7 something or other. 7? 7 out of what? 7 they are. And she says, so I'm going to put you on. She don't say, would you like to take? Here are the options. This is what it means. This is what it doesn't mean. She says, I'm going to put you on Semastatin. Semastatin, 40 milligrams per day for life. For life. Semastatin. Okay, the doctor's orders. The doctor knows best. Apple a day keeps the doctor away. I didn't do that, and therefore Semastatin. The companies go to the doctors. Every month they have pharmaceutical companies come to the doctor's surgery. They advise them on the latest drugs. They offer them, well, if you take this pharmaceutical product, you get a holiday in Bermuda. If you take this product, you get £1,000 prize. If you get this product, we donate this much money to buy this equipment for your hospital, for your clinic. If you get this one, you get a holiday in Anatolia in Turkey, and you can sit in the sun and put suntan lotion on. And in that way, the medical profession is thoroughly and utterly corrupted. That does not mean that every doctor is corrupt, but it means that the profession and the industry is a capitalist industry, even in countries where they call it public service. In fact, it is dominated by private interests. And therefore those private interests, you have to ask yourself, are they there to serve your health? Well, the answer to that is simple. How much time will a doctor spend with you? You go to the doctor, and the doctor has got a queue outside, and the timing has been set that the doctor will see you for between 5 and 10 minutes. Therefore, they cannot possibly do what is required of a doctor, which is an art, not a science. A doctor is looking at an individual person, and understanding that person means knowing them, personally knowing them, and understanding their persona, their mindset, their mental and physical health, their environmental conditions, the food they eat, the circumstance, their state of mind, their happiness or sadness, whether they've lost people recently. All these factors shape the nature of a human being and their ability to fight off disease. Fight off disease. I saw someone the other day said, I've just been for an operation to remove pre-cancerous cells. Many of you will have had the same. I've been for operation, they said to me, well, you've got pre-cancerous cells. We removed them. The pre-cancerous cell. What is a pre-cancerous cell? It is a non-cancerous cell. But they call it pre-cancerous. Now I tell you this, something you didn't know. Every child who is born, the youngest child at Speaker's Corner today, they all have pre-cancerous cells in them. Every child who is here, every adult who is here, has billions of viruses in them now. Many people here will have viruses that can kill you, at least if your body and its immunity is weakened and undermined. And what is the best method of undermining human immunity? It is to spread fear. Scare people to death. Fear is an industry. It is a pornographic industry. They show horror films on television. They are worse than pornography. Much worse than pornography. They want to sell you permanent paranoia and fear. I remember when AIDS came. The HIV virus. By the way, asymptomatic. Yeah? They told everyone, you're going to die if you have sex without a piece of rubber on your genital. In actual fact, this is not true. This is not true. I no longer believe at all in that story.
Well,
Because
can I
you
ask
have to
about the blood
counter.
scandal?
Just one sec.
How that
Let me
was
finish your
suppressed.
flow. Let me finish your flow.
That is a serious issue.
Let me
that
finish your
these
flow.
people, these innocent
They
people
gave
died.
people drugs called AZT that killed people.
Talking about
And those
the
people then
American blood.
were called AIDS victims.
And all these people
In
are
actual
dying
fact,
now.
many of those people had nothing wrong with them until they were given the drugs. Rudolf Nureyev, for example, dropped down dead after being given this cocktail of poisonous drugs. That's right. And many other people. So these circumstances can tell you a lot about the dynamics of an industry that thrives on spreading fear. The other industry that thrives on fear, one of the great industries in the world, is the arms industry. The arms industry. They push the fear of war. And I've had this since I was a child, they've been telling us. We're about to go to war. We're on the edge of war. The Russians are going to come. We're going to fight the Russians. We're going to make nuclear bombs. We're going to protect the world. We're going to save you from the enemy. And for right throughout my life, they were promoting this. Then the collapse of the Berlin Wall. No bombs being fired. Now the war in Ukraine. The war in Iraq. Remember they said chemical and bacteriological weapons were going to hit Britain within 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Then they said the war on terror. The war on terror. The war on telly, more like. Constantly promoting fear. So if people die with weakened immunity because they live in fear, well, no, a society should be a society living in hope, in happiness, in peace, freedom and plenty. Thanks very much. Hooray, hooray. Good for you, hooray. That's it. Sorry, you were going to say.
Scandal, not one-
You were going to say.
Yeah, the blood scandal.